Hi, everyone. We are so excited today because this long-awaited Citizenship Act that we've been waiting for a very long time is now finally in effect. With me today, we have Aadil Mangalji, who is the partner at our law firm that takes care of all of these citizenship applications. So, Aadil, tell us, who does this new Citizenship Act affect?
So the individuals that are going to be most affected by this are individuals born overseas as second generation Canadians or later. So now the government's going to look at citizens, so those born in Canada or naturalized in Canada, and then first generation, so their children that they have overseas would be first generation born abroad, and then a new category of second generation or later.
Okay, so for people who are born in Canada or naturalized, this act, there's no changes for them.
Nothing.
And also for people who are born outside of Canada, but their parents were born in Canada or naturalized, it also doesn't affect
Yeah,
them.
those are regular first
Those
generation.
are all citizens, no problem. What it becomes now is because before we had the Citizenship Act, the old one basically didn't allow people to pass it on. The first generation who were born abroad, they were citizens, but they couldn't pass the citizenship along to their descendants. But now this is changed. I understand that December 15th is a cutoff date. Can you explain what that means?
If you are born abroad and you want to pass it down to a second generation or later, if they were born after this date, you will have to have spent 3 years in Canada in order to pass down your citizenship. And this could be at any point before the birth of the child. However, those 3 years have to have been spent in Canada by the parent in order for the parent to pass down citizenship.
And this is also for adoptions as well?
Yes, it's also for adoptions, which is really nice because adoptions used to be much more complicated, and now they're looking at it in the exact same way.
If someone is born or adopted after today's date, or even today, if that so happens to be the case, they can only be citizens if their parents, and their parents are not born in Canada or naturalized. They're first generation citizens or even beyond, but they're citizens themselves, but they have to have lived in Canada for 3 years before the birth or adoption. So what if that doesn't happen? What if someone is a citizen themselves, but they have not lived in Canada for over 3 years? What can they do if they want to come to Canada and have their children join them?
It's a break in the citizenship line, so their child would not be a citizen, but they're citizens, so they could come to Canada and they could sponsor their children to come to Canada, and their children would come in as permanent residents. And then they would just have to meet the regular residency obligations, which would then take them to citizenship.
The big news is all of these people, and I hear that there are a lot of celebrities like Madonna, Hillary Clinton. I hear that there are all sorts of people who have ancestry that they can trace to people who are Canadians in Canada. So it could be their great 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 grandparents. And if they're born before today's date, what happens?
If you can show ancestry to a Canadian ancestor, then you can make a claim for Canadian citizenship. And it's not an application. Essentially, it's a claim for a certificate right off the bat.
So you may not know that you're a citizen, but if you can trace it, you are a citizen. We just have to prove it.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about the proof. We did have an interim measure that the government had implemented for everyone who had applied under the interim measure. And it was basically similar rules to what this is today, right? So what happens to everyone who had applied under the interim measure?
We've been actually doing these applications now for almost since last January, so for almost a year. And at that time, basically the government was allowing individuals who would meet all of these requirements to apply under what we call Citizenship 5.4 of the Citizenship Act. Now, all of those applications are in place, and everyone is asking, what's going to happen to my 5.4 application? And what the government has told us is that they're just going to automatically be turning them into regular citizenship certificate applications. So we're really excited about that. It means you don't have to do anything at this point, that all that's going to happen is they're going to be considering it under the provisions of this act now.
And the provisions are essentially the same. So if
They're
you
exactly the
qualified under
same.
interim measure, you should qualify as well.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent. How does one go about proving all the documentation that goes into proving your citizenship?
The best way to be able to prove this is through what we call birth records, or if you have birth certificates going all the way back. Now, of course, the further back you go, the worse the documentation is getting. And every province, as we know, has completely different processes for getting these documentation. So we're working very closely with archivists to be able to find documentation that does prove this. In most cases, what we want are birth records. Those are the very best pieces of documentation that you can get. However, we can't always get that, mostly because of how provinces kept a lot of their records. And the Citizenship Act allows you to use alternative forms of evidence to also prove citizenship. And so, in certain cases, we are making arguments for citizenship even when we don't have birth records. So, it's really important to be speaking to lawyers who are also teaming up with archivists to be able to get proper documentation. And this becomes even more critical the further you go back.
So, are you a Canadian citizen? If you are, and you want to get your passport, you want to get your citizenship, let us know.
One thing that we are encouraging everyone to do is to at least go online, ask your relatives, kind of do ancestry.com searches to see if you have a link to Canadian citizenship. And if you do, we can talk about getting you a citizenship certificate
Perfect time for those chats around the Christmas tree.
around the holidays.
Awesome. Okay, take care, everyone.